When the king gets killed in a battle, what do powerful men do? Do they run away instead of surrendering to the enemy, leaving the position of the head of state vacant? Or do they take advantage of the power vacuum and grab the opportunity to be the ruler of the kingdom for themselves? The kingdom of Israel faced the same situation at that time. Of course, the Philistines killed the King Shaul, but for whatever reason, they did not try to conquer all territory of Israel. It was enough for them to kill the king of Israel. So there was a power vacuum in the kingdom. The Israelis had the opportunity to fill up the monarchy, but what did they do? So in our last lesson, we discussed how David ascended to power. Well, at least in the tribe of Yehuda. However, we learned that the commander of Shaul, Avner, installed Ishbosheth, one of the sons of Shaul, survivor, to succeed his deceased father. So that was our title for last week's message, Start Right in Serving the Lord, because David was now beginning to serve as king of Israel. However, we learned that as much as David tried to start properly, start everything right by inquiring of the Lord on what he will be doing, and the Lord gave him an instruction to rule from Hebron in Yehuda instead of going to Gibeah in Benjamin, where Shaul was ruling, to take his throne. He didn't do that. God instructed him to go to Hebron. So, as we ended our lesson last week, let us review first how we ended there. We noted that David increased his family and strengthened his clan by having 6 sons from 6 wives in 7.5 years. So we have the list there. Of course, the daughters were not mentioned anymore. So remember, the king was under the rule of the law of Moses. He was not above it. So the sad thing here is that he was violating the law of the Lord, and soon enough he would pay for this mistake. But God in this case tolerated him because he had no other plan for David but to rule. He didn't have any other person to rule for Israel instead of David. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 7, he must not take many wives or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. So in this case, the Lord did not penalize him for having many wives. He would just soon realize that it was a mistake. And remember, David had not known Bathsheba at this time. And from Bathsheba, David would have Shelomo or Solomon, who would be replacing him soon. So it's not among the 6 sons of David from the 6 wives that he had previously that he would have a successor. Of course, one tried to become the successor, but it was Shelomo who succeeded David. Today we move on to the next chapter, chapter 3 of 2 Samuel. David was not the only powerful person in the kingdom. There were other men who were very influential. And he had to deal with 3 more men. Avner, again the commander of the army of Shaul, and Ishbosheth, the one that Avner installed as the next king after Shaul, and as well as Yoav, David's nephew. Not to mention his brother Avishai, but Yoav was the more powerful one. So the title of our message for today is How Mighty Men Use Power. So we are now in part 17. We have gone a long way. No, David may have been the greatest commander Israel has ever had, especially at that time. But he was tested when dealing with other powerful men, now that Shaul was gone. And we will find out how David showed imprudence in working with Avner, and he showed his weakness in dealing with Yoav, his nephew, who eventually became the commander of his army for the whole of Israel. So as we talk about chapter 3, we will have to learn how David dealt with the southern Israelis, his own tribe. It was easy for him to rule over the Yehudis. With Avner, the commander of the army of Shaul, with Yoav, his own commander, and with the northern Israelis, whom he had to convince that he should be their king, not Ishbosheth. So we will try to answer the question how mighty men use their power as we deal with these relationships that David had. Let's go back to 2 Samuel chapter 2. Remember, we learned that Ishbosheth is the son of Saul and he became king of Israel and he reigned for a couple of years. In verse 11, the length of time David was king in Hebron over Yehuda was 7 years and 6 months. So David has been waiting for the opportunity to rule over the whole kingdom of Israel, but God did not give him that opportunity yet upon the death of Shaul. And perhaps he was not expecting that the weaker son of Shaul would be ruling the northern territory of Israel. And he decided not to challenge him. He was very careful. Of course, he did not realize that the reign of Ishbosheth would only be short-lived. In chapter 4, we will learn that Ishbosheth would be murdered. That's the sad part. It says there, 7.5 years minus 2 years of the reign of Ishbosheth, he had to wait for 5.5 years. So upon the death of Ishbosheth, he did not immediately reign over the northern territories. So, was David satisfied with reigning over just his tribe, Yehuda, or was he eager for power to reign over all of Israel? We'll find out. So I have 4 points to share this evening. First, a conceited man uses power abusively. Okay? So the conceited person here is Avner. Avner took advantage of his power over Ishbosheth because he's the one who inducted him as the king of Israel by defecting to David. So that's what we will see in the story today. He would defect to David. Avner was the most powerful man in northern kingdom of Israel. It was not really Ishbosheth. Even the king he installed, Ishbosheth, could not overrule him. Why? What's wrong with Avner becoming conceited? We'll find out. Verse 6. During the war between the house of Shaul and the house of David, Avner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Shaul. So instead of Ishbosheth becoming the strongest person, it was Avner. Now Shaul had a concubine named Ritzpah, daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Avner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" It was a desecration of the family of Shaul. It was disrespectful. So this war can be considered a cold war between the house of David and the house of Shaul. Now it turned violent, as we learned last week's lesson, when the men of Shaul and the men of David met together in Gibeon, and they had a contest which turned deadly. And you know how the story went. Okay? Asahel tried to chase Avner. Avner had to defend himself. Avner had to kill Asahel so that he would stop. And everybody was surprised that somebody died in the contest. It just was supposedly a contest. And because of that, Avner had to run away even though they were in Benjamin, in his own territory. Joab and Avishai chased him until the people of Benjamin tried to barricade him, keep them at distance, and that stopped the fighting. And Abner appealed to Joab, "Stop this," and everybody went home. So Joab went home with Avishai, his brother, and all the Israelis really hurt. They lost 20 men, while the northern people lost more than 300 men in that encounter. It was not necessary that moment would turn violent. So verse 7 tells us the problem with Avner. He was strengthening himself over Ishbosheth by sleeping with Ritzpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Shaul. So what did Avner had in mind? Maybe he was thinking he could dispose of Ishbosheth because he wouldn't be there if it were not for him. He was really the powerful person. We will see this in the next verse, that Ishbosheth finally had the courage to confront Avner for his misdeed. And that's what verses 8 and 9 will tell us. Verse 8, Avner was very angry because what Ishbosheth said. So he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Yehuda's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Shaul and to his family and to his friends. I haven't handed you over to David." He's saying, I could have done that, but I have not. Yet now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman. We're not sure if it's really true, but I suppose that it's really true. That Avner really slept with Ritzpah. But he's denying it in front of Ishbosheth. Because that's what you get from a conceited man. A conceited man does not accept correction, but resists it and fights his confronter. So it was so difficult for Ishbosheth to deal with this person. Now, we will also find out something similar in the southern kingdom. David had a problem with his own chief of staff, Joab, because they were very powerful men and they're also sort of taking advantage of the king. Verse 9, may God deal with Avner, be it ever so severely. Remember, Avner is speaking here, but he's saying, may God deal with me. But he's referring to himself on the third person. If I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom from the house of Shaul, and establish David's throne over Israel and Yehuda from Dan to Beer-sheba. So now, this conceited man Avner was threatening Ishbosheth that he could turn to David. And as much as he was the one who installed him there, I could depose you and I could give your kingdom to David. So imagine how scared Ishbosheth was. He wasn't like Jehonathan, his older brother, who was a strong man. He wasn't a warrior. But remember, he was already 40 years old at this time. So if he was about 40 years old and Avner was also the nephew of Shaul, maybe they're about the same age. But Avner was the stronger man. Okay? And later on, in the next few chapters, 2 Samuel said that David would reign on Israel at the age of 30. So maybe Avner was about a couple of decades older than David. And I think that David was about the age of Joab. Remember, David was the youngest. Zeruiah, David's sister, had so many sons already at that time. So maybe David was about the same age or a little older than Joab. So if Abner was about in his 40s, maybe David was in his 20s, as much as Joab was. And he had 3 brothers who were also warriors. Okay. So let's go back to the story. A conceited man does not respect higher authority. He threatened Ishbosheth. A weak man, Ishbosheth, does not know how to fight back. So Ishbosheth was helpless against Avner. Letter B. A cunning man uses power carefully. So who is the cunning man here? It's David. David tests the power of Ishbosheth by demanding to have his wife back. He knew that he had to be smart in dealing with Avner and Ishbosheth. So 2 Samuel chapter 3 verses 12 to 21, though Michal, the wife of David before that Shaul gave to him, was unjustly taken away from David, who had been waiting to get her back either righteously because that's his wife, politically because he had a connection with Shaul because if he's gonna reign as king and if he's the son-in-law of Shaul, that gives him some legitimacy to replace Shaul instead of Ishbosheth. Okay, or both. He had to get back Michal because he loves his wife. Remember, Michal helped David escape from the window, and at the same time, he can use her for political reasons. The new king took advantage of the weakness of Ishbosheth. So let's see how this story went. Verse 12. Then Avner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, whose land is it? So this is a rhetorical question, sort of saying, David, this land really belongs to you. You're the right king to be ruling in this place. Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you. Now, did David wonder why Avner was making this offer to David? I think no, because he already knew that it was Avner who installed Ishbosheth. So I think David knew that Ishbosheth was helpless before Avner. And if Avner could help him win that northern territory to him, maybe David could grab that opportunity. Verse 13. Good, said David. Wow. I didn't expect that offer. Avner wanted me to rule over the northern Israel. I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Shaul, when you come to see me. He thought that this was the perfect opportunity to get my wife back. Again, either righteously or politically. Let's go back to verse 12. Did Avner truly want David to be the new king? We don't know. Maybe he found it difficult to make himself the king. Maybe he was satisfied with Ishbosheth, officially the king, but he's the one who's the powerful one in the kingdom of Israel. But at this time, he wanted to destroy Ishbosheth, so the only way he could do it is actually to his rival, David. Avner did not replace Ishbosheth with anyone or by himself. He didn't look for another son of Shaul. He thought of David. That's the easiest thing to do. So in verse 13, David agreed. Now, why did David believe Avner that he was sincere, that he can actually help him have control over the whole of Israel? Well, maybe it's because he knew that there's some political thing going on there in the north. You see, David made the negotiation here. It's common. Negotiation is common among people trying to have a win-win situation. They both do not want to lose, of course. So they had to pitch their interests and achieve what they desired. So David wanted to have legitimacy. He didn't want to become king just because of Avner, just like Ishbosheth became the king. He wanted to be the king because he really deserved it, with or without the help of Avner, but his help would be a big plus for him. So why was David interested in getting Michal back? Again, is it for justice or for politics? The connection had to be established. Even though Michal has been given to Paltiel, David would have to argue that I have paid for Michal with 300 foreskins of the Philistines. So it was unjust that I have been divorced by Shaul from my wife Michal. She's still my wife. Okay? he didn't accept that decision of Shaul. If David would still be married to Michal, that means he's connected with the people of Benjamin, and therefore he had the right over the throne of Shaul. So, was Abner taking advantage of David? Or was it the other way around? David was taking advantage of Abner? Or maybe both? Maybe both. Maybe both. Verse 14, then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Shaul, demanding, give me my wife Michal. I demand. Whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistines' foreskins. So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, go back home. So he went back home. Okay. Paltiel could not do anything. Remember in the previous verse, verse 13, David made the demand to Abner, but then it was David who sent messengers to Ishbosheth. He did not tell Abner, you tell Ishbosheth. David himself sent messengers, but it was Abner who's supposed to bring her back to him. Okay? Why was that? It's because it needs to be a king-to-king communication, a king-to-king correspondence. That's the proper way to communicate. So David argues that he paid for Michal. She belongs to him. You see, when he made that demand to Ishbosheth, he did not name Abner. It was just understood that Abner is going to pick her up and bring her to him. So in verse 15, Ishbosheth was probably intimidated with the demand, especially that Abner was there to pick up Michal. Obviously, he was getting weaker and David was taking advantage of his weakness. He knew that the demand of David was valid. He may have wanted to avoid any argument or any fight. So, okay, I'll just give her to him. No questions asked. I'll make it easier for David. Knowing that Abner has met with David, Ishbosheth forces Paltiel to divorce Michal and return her to David. Actually, there is a law in the law of Moses that a divorced wife cannot go back to her first husband because that's a mockery of marriage. But this is a different case because David nor Michal, they did not divorce themselves to each other. It was Shaul who did that. Verse 17, Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, so now Abner is talking to the leaders. He's ignoring Ishbosheth. Okay? For some time, you have wanted to make David your king. This is what you really want. Maybe because they're realizing that Ishbosheth was a useless king. Now do it, for the Lord promised David. So now, right now, he's using the name of the Lord. Well, he's correct anyway for this. By my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. So right now, Abner is doing the right thing. He is making an appeal to the revelation of God to David. So this is not a surprising political move. Abner pitches for David's rule over northern Israel before the elders of those people. Again, we said that the cunning man here is David. Cunningly, David allows Abner to convince the elders of Israel to turn their support from Ishbosheth to himself. Let Abner do it for me. Let him talk to the elders. Anyway, Ishbosheth cannot do anything when Abner speaks. And it's just proper that Abner talks to them. It's unusual for me, the kingdom of the south, simply to ask for a meeting for the elders of Israel. It's going to be weird. Okay? Verse 19, Abner also spoke to the ears of Benjamin. So this is a private thing. He's really, sa Tagalog, ginagapang niya yung mga tao. Okay? So Abner was really going to the grassroots, telling the people of Benjamin, it's not Ishbosheth should be the king, it should be David. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. He was able to convince everybody. David must have been delighted to receive the good news from Abner at the expense of Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth could not do anything. Verse 20, when Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. So David was in a festive mood. Wow, Abner is about to make this real for me. Verse 21, then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you and that you may rule over all your heart's desire. So they're done with the festivities, so Abner wanted to complete the job. So David sent Abner away and he went in peace. So let's go back to verse 20. He said, David was in a very welcoming mood because the time is near for him to rule over all the kingdom without having to harm Ishbosheth. Abner is going to depose him for him. And he received well the men of Avner. David allowed Avner in a cunning way to facilitate everything, the transfer of power from Ishbosheth to himself. So he didn't even ask, so what are you going to do with Ishbosheth? What matters to me is you get rid of Ishbosheth and you introduce me to the northern people and they will make me as their king. See what Avner says here in verse 21. So let me go home. Okay? Let me just complete this job. Avner spoke with sweet and promising words to David. Avner called David, my Lord the King. And he said that they may make a covenant with you. This is music to the ears of David. And that they may rule over all that your heart desires. So he appeals to the emotions of David. Remember, David was not just a mighty warrior. He was kind of emotional person. He was a musician. You know, musicians tend to be more emotional. It's not bad, okay, compared with people who are melancholic. Both Avner and David were excited to get this done. So Avner said, let me go home now so I can take care of businesses. Did David think that Avner would respect him when he comes to power? Remember, Avner did not respect Ishbosheth when he brought him to power. Now, did David think Avner will respect me if he places me in power? Now, think about that. It could be not the case. Diba? Did David think that the Lord was working through Avner to give him the northern territories of Israel from Ishbosheth? Well, we don't know what was going on in the mind of David. But that's something interesting to think about. What was going on in the mind of David when he was about to receive the kingdom from Avner? Okay? Third lesson. An angry man uses power uncontrollably. Who's this angry man? It's Joab, the chief of staff of the army of the southern kingdom. David becomes helpless against murderous Joab. So you remember, last week I showed to you the picture of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Yoav is an angry man because he hadn't had the opportunity to avenge for the death of his brother Asahel. Okay? David ignored Yoav's anger over Avner in favor of the commander's help to grab power from Ishbosheth. I don't care what Yoav thinks anymore. What matters to me is Avner is about to help me out. He didn't listen to Yoav even after being confronted about dealing with Avner. Actually, Yoav wasn't in the picture when this happened. And when he gets into the picture, this will turn things ugly. Verse 22, then David's men and Yoav returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. Yahoo, yahoo, yahoo! Yoav was a victorious man. But Avner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him away and he had gone in peace. Maybe it was intentional for David to send Yoav away so he can deal with Avner. Probably. Maybe. When Yoav and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Avner, son of Ner, had come to the king and that the king had sent him away and that he had gone in peace. Avner was actually here? Really? And David sent him away in peace? Oh, wow. So imagine how surprised Yoav was to learn that how David accommodated and celebrated with Avner and how they agreed to turn over the northern Israel to the king and celebrate about it. While I was away winning wars and getting some plunder for the southern tribe. Imagine, he came from a big victory and when he arrived home, all of a sudden, this bad news, it was bad for Yoav. The Abner was there and David sent him away. He was outraged. He wanted to avenge the murder of his brother. Did Yoav consider David's agreement with Abner a treachery against him? Well, Yoav wasn't above David, so it wouldn't be a treachery, but a treachery in the sense that he knew he wanted to kill Abner. And why would David make an agreement with him? Verse 24. So Yoav went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he's gone. You know Abner, son of Ner? He came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you are doing. Why are you so naive? Why are you so dumb?" Well, he almost said that. We don't know. Maybe he was shouting out loud at his uncle, at the king. Maybe he was being disrespectful at this time because he was so outraged. Did Yoav seek for clarification why David made an agreement with Abner? I don't think it mattered to him at that time anymore. He was thinking about having the opportunity to kill Yoav. Did he feel David disregarded him with this decision to make an agreement with Abner? I think so. I think so. Because he is his chief of staff, okay, of the army. Did Joab raise his objection to David in a respectful manner or extremely outraged way? I think he was really, really upset. Verse 26. Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner. And they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah, but David did not know it. Okay, where is Sirah? So Sirah, in my search, is about 1.5 miles. So that's about 2.4 kilometers north, going back to Israel, north from Hebron. So he wasn't gone too far. Okay? So they picked him up from where Abner was. They haven't gone that far. And he sent messengers, come back to Hebron. So it was a deceit. Joab took the matter into his own hands without David's knowledge. He deceived Abner. David wasn't calling Abner back. That's what Joab told Abner, come back. Okay? Verse 27. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in an inner chamber, as if to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach and he died. So that was actually the picture of our title. Joab killing Abner. Joab murdered Abner to avenge the death of his brother Asahel. Joab did not care what David would think. What mattered to him is, I need to take opportunity to kill Abner, no matter what the consequences would be. No matter how bad this would look on David. Okay? Avenging Asahel's death meant more to Joab. Remember, he is an angry man. An angry man uses power uncontrollably. He was out of control. I'm jumping here into chapter 8, verse 15. Joab was a very important person to David. He was only introduced in our story last week, in chapter 2. Now, in chapter 8, verse 15, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, remember this is the sister of David, was over the army, and so on and so forth. The other important people in his leadership. So, Joab was over the military, and the other were in the recording, in the administration, in the religious services, and so on and so forth. So Joab really took advantage of his power to kill Abner. Verse 28, later, when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy. What a curse. Or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. Maybe David was thinking, whatever possible way for them to have this misfortune, may it come to them because of what he did to Abner. So was David surprised at this act of Joab, that he would murder Abner? He shouldn't be, because remember, Joab was so angry when he learned that David made an agreement with Abner to give him the northern territory. Did David think that when Abner was murdered, that his plan to take the power from Ishbosheth has been jeopardized? Maybe because no one's going to help him anymore. And it actually gets worse for him. It's because he had to explain why their commander is dead in Hebron at the hands of his commander, Joab. It will cause them more trouble against the northern people. Maybe they would fight back. It happened in your own city, in Hebron. You murdered our commander. So what you can see here in verses 28 and 29, David makes this proclamation of innocence. He had to do it publicly. He had to announce he has nothing to do with the death of Abner. Maybe David was really scared at what Joab did, because this could turn really bad. He wanted to win the people of the north, their hearts, and he was about to make a covenant with them. But then this thing happened. So they would probably suspect David had planned this all along. Instead of receiving the kingdom in a peaceful manner, he had to murder Abner. But David said, I am innocent. I and my kingdom. So if I'm innocent and it happened in your territory, who's guilty? He said, it's Joab in verse 29. You see, if you are the king and something wrong happened, you have to explain. You have to announce publicly how these things happened. People needed an explanation. So imagine how David was thinking, how am I going to explain this to everyone? Even to my own people, the Yehudis. because I'm also getting them into trouble against the northern people. Imagine how troubled David was on how to explain his innocence and how Abner got murdered. David could only wish that justice would fall on Joab and his family. Even though he had the authority and the power to execute justice, he could have arrested Joab and convicted him and executed him for murdering. So why he didn't do that? Why did he just pronounce curses? Well, actually, the next few verses would explain to us. Was Joab's revenge justified? Why was it difficult for David to arrest and judge Joab? One of the possibilities why David could not arrest him, actually, the next verse will explain to us, but maybe Joab had the sympathy of people. Joab was just exacting revenge against Abner. And if you're in the position of Joab, you would have done the same. So maybe for the people, what Joab did was justifiable. So it was difficult for David to actually put Joab on trial and have him executed for murder. Maybe Joab was too popular for what he did. Verse 30, Joab and his brother Avishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle at Gibeon. So the author had to refresh the memories of the readers. Why Joab and Avishai murdered Abner without judging if it was justifiable or not. Last, a weaker man uses power softly. Who's the weaker man here? David. Relative to Joab, David had to defend his innocence in the murder of Abner through mourning. So verses 31 to 39. Unable to convict Joab and Avishai for the murder of Abner in Hebron, David had to command Joab to be remorseful for what he did, and for all Yehudis to mourn for Abner, so that there will not be a war between the southern people, the Yehudis, and the northern people. Verse 31, Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. You guys, even though you're the ones who murdered Abner, you put on sackcloth and be in front. Be in front of what? Of the parade, the marching of the coffin. King David himself walked behind the bier. The bier is the portable thing that carries the coffin. So his men, those who murdered Abner, were in front of the coffin. David was just behind him. See, these are the people. Shame on them. So you better tear your clothes. You better show that you're mourning, that you regret doing this. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud. Aloud. Was this real? Let's find out. At Abner's tomb, all the people wept also. So he spared Joab from conviction. David commanded Joab to mourn, to show to the people publicly that the death of Abner was a mistake. He forced him. David led all the people to mourn, not just them who are involved. He gave Abner an honorable burial. He had to say good things about Abner. He showed that he was most affected by walking behind the coffin of Abner during the march. I could not let this go, but what can I do? Huh? So David did not return the body of Abner to Benjamin. Maybe he couldn't do that. It was just so hard to explain. David showed that he truly was hurt at the death of Abner. Why? Was it because he lost the opportunity to take power from Ishbosheth? Or was it because he had to show everybody that he did not want Abner to be killed? He needed Abner. He needed his help. Now, I think this is a hard question to answer because we're not there, okay? Was David sincere at the death of Abner? Maybe. Did David regret the death of Abner and deemed it a loss of opportunity to rule over northern Israel? Yes, but he was more concerned at the repercussions of the death of Abner. Verse 33, the king sang this lament for Abner. He wanted the people to know this song. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? A shameful death, he was murdered. Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked. So he was saying, Abner should not have died in this manner. And all the people wept over him. So what's going on here? Did not the burial of Abner ended everything? Obviously not, because there would be more questions. So David had to popularize a lament for Abner's death. He had to do it because he was really caught in this bad situation. He questioned his senseless death in the song. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? That means Abner should not have died in that way. He indirectly implicated Joab, though he did not mention his name in the song. He explained how Abner was deceptively murdered. Your hands were not bound. Your feet were not fettered. Abner did not deserve to be murdered. So that is the dilemma of David. Whatever he did not guarantee that it would explain the death of Abner and it would make him really look innocent. Well, he was indeed innocent. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath saying, "May God deal with me, be it so ever severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets." So David was really showing, I'm in trouble here. This is really bad. I couldn't eat. So David was extending his mourning to fasting. This is a gesture to the people of Israel, especially to Joab. You caused me this trouble. Verse 36, all the people took note and were pleased at last. It took him so much effort to honor Abner and to indirectly condemn Joab, just to be able to explain to the people of Israel that he was innocent and that Abner should not have been killed. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. So with all the declaration, verse earlier, and the gesture like the mourning, the weeping, the fasting, that David was not part of the murder of Abner and that his death was unjustified, the author had to tell us. Of course, the author was defensive of David. He's on the side of David. That the people were convinced of David's innocence. It was a huge effort for David. And it was a difficult effort. What will convince the people that I'm innocent and Abner didn't deserve to die? Did this close the issue? Maybe, maybe not. Last few verses. Then the king said to his men, "Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day?" He called him a great man, even though Abner was really a bad man. "And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak, and these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his deeds." Now, this is really a hard thing to do, for him to confess how he was a weak man. That's our letter D. Letter D, a weak man uses power softly. He really didn't use his power over Abner. David could not get over the death of Abner. He knew that things were so unsatisfactory, even though the people were pleased, because the murderer was not convicted. There is an irony in this situation. Even though David was the king, and he had the authority and the power, but he couldn't use it to execute justice against Joab and his brother Abishai. It was a difficult situation for David. It was difficult for him to confess this truth. He said, "Today, though I am the king, I'm the greatest guy here, I'm the most powerful, I am weak. And these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me." It's going to be a hard fight if he executes his own nephews. It's going to cause trouble over his own family. And it will destroy his own clan. While he wanted to give justice to Abner, he had to rely on Joab as the chief of his army. Again, David was soft and weak against Joab. And that was a hard thing to say. I am weak. But he had to say it. Maybe it takes a strong man to say, I am weak. The best that David could do was to warn Joab that justice would soon catch up to him. So, those 4 points. David and the southern Israelis, he had to rule the south for 7.5 years, but he had to wait 5.5 years since the death of Ishbosheth before he takes the power over all Israel. Was David getting impatient in waiting to rule over the northern Israel? Maybe that's why he agreed with Abner. David and Abner, he tested Ishbosheth's power by demanding for Michal. He grabbed the opportunity to rule over the north with Abner's defection. Did he ask for the Lord's will? If he could take the agreement or the offer of Abner, it didn't say anything about it. The Lord just allowed him. Maybe the Lord was testing David. Here's Abner, what would you do about this man? Would you be blinded with his offer? Would you connive with him to depose Ishbosheth? Letter D, David and Joab did not arrest Joab and Abishai for the murder of Abner. Why was he too weak before his nephews? It was a difficult situation. Letter D, David and the northern Israelis, he had to show the north that he was innocent of the murder of Abner, and he forced everybody to mourn for Abner. Was David sincere about the loss of Abner, with whom he could work over powerful Joab? He chose Abner over Joab, but of course, he cannot use Abner anymore. How the mighty uses power. A conceited man uses power abusively. A cunning man uses power carefully. An angry man uses power uncontrollably. A weaker man uses power softly.